Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media Saskatchewan's look at politics and the Saskatchewan legislature and what happened this week. Joining me, as always, Jeremy Symes, the political reporter for the Regina Lear Post, and joining me again this weekend. Thanks for joining us again, Mickey Djuric from Canadian Press, who's having a pretty busy week, I imagine, because there's going to be a lot of emphasis on her to do her Grey Cup stories that she loves. So I imagine. So thanks for making the time for us, Mickey. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe we'll get a beer later at the
That would
celebrations.
be, yeah, that
Yes,
would be.
but
I could drink a beer. Yeah, maybe we should drink a beer during this thing
after
before
this one.
Mickey goes
Yeah.
into it.
Mhm.
Let's start out with a health question. Medicinal in other ways. Uh, Mickey, you covered Dr. Saqib Shahab's latest press conference on COVID-19 and influenza updates, both of which seem to be a priority, but neither of which Dr. Shahab recommended or will be willing to recommend any further mask use. Can you detail it for us, please?
Yeah, he essentially said that ultimately it's your personal choice to wear a mask. He stopped short of recommending masks, even though we are seeing a pretty sharp increase in flu and RSV. He said that COVID-19 in the province, at least its burden on the healthcare system, has essentially plateaued. The health minister said Paul Merriman has said that him and Dr. Saqib Shahab haven't even talked about mask recommendations, and he did say that the healthcare system isn't necessarily experiencing pressures from these illnesses where they have to cut services right now. And I think in the past, what we've seen in this province is it's when we're starting to have to cut services or surgeries. That's when the government is more inclined to bring in a mask mandate, for example. But that's not
That's interesting because
happening.
they're at least still looking at parameters, which I'm a little surprised at. There wasn't a lot of kickback, I thought, online from people concerned about COVID. Did Dr. Shahab address that, Mickey, in any kind of meaningful way in terms of people's reaction to it? Because what I'm seeing a lot of is wondering why, particularly with what's happening in Ontario right now, why Saskatchewan isn't doing more.
Well, he did say that COVID-19 is still producing about, on average, 150 hospitalizations a week. So that's that kind of plateaued level that he was mentioning. And his concern is with the flu season coming, that's going to add more pressure on that baseline of COVID-19 hospitalization. So what he's recommending, as opposed to masks, is that people get their flu shots, people get their COVID shots. And he said, honestly, the best thing that people can do right now is just stay home when you're sick.
That's not really helping a lot of people that are sort of dealing with issues at home related to sickness, is it, Jeremy? Because one of the issues, and I'm surprised that it came up as dramatically as I guess it did in the legislature this week, was the whole issue with children's Tylenol. I'm surprised because it's mostly been a federal issue right now. But both, can you just speak, I guess, to the way the NDP raised it in the House and the government reaction to it, and where the problem might be in terms of a provincial government having to deal with this particular issue?
Right, absolutely. So the children's Tylenol thing has really come to a head, I guess, this past week federally. And so there's been a lot of chatter here in Saskatchewan about parents having problems accessing Tylenol for their kids that are having fever. So I spoke with a dad who was really scrambling to find some, and he was saying, "We live in Canada. Why can't we get Tylenol here? It's easier to get it in maybe other countries right now." So that's kind of like the couch for this. And in the House, NDP health critic Vicky Mowat has brought this up, and she's asked the government, what are you going to do to track the Tylenol shipments that are coming in? And what's the plan to make sure parents can get their hands on some? It is a federal issue, like you said. We spoke with Health Minister Paul Merriman about it, and his response was, we don't control the shipments that come into Saskatchewan. We don't have a say in what medications come into the country because it is a country border per se. What he did raise, though, was that like the federal government has said that Tylenol is coming for folks and there's going to be a 3 month supply. But he said part of the reason we have had this black backlog is because there's no French labeling on the Tylenol. And so because we're Canada, we're bilingual, we need English and French. So he's saying, why don't we just get English only Tylenol up here? Regardless of that, it looks like it is coming. I don't know if it's going to be English only or bilingual, but the federal government has promised it will be here. And Merriman has asked folks to please only take what you need. And if you need it, please do not hoard your Tylenol because there are lots of kids right now having fevers, and parents would like to give them some relief from that.
Yeah, I know way too many parents that are dealing with this and struggling with this, and I think it has a lot to do with masking and other things that have been going on in schools elsewhere. And we haven't had quite the same flu season as we've had in the past, which is kind of a bit of an indication that masking kind of works, which is kind of interesting. And maybe that's one of the reasons the government isn't talking about it. Mickey, I'm just fascinated by what the government is and isn't talking about sometimes in relation to what the people are talking about. And it is, we'll get into this a little bit more because there's a whole bunch of real meat and potato issues, pandemic related and post pandemic related, especially related to inflationary costs, we'll get into in a moment. But one of the things that you raised today with Policing Minister Christine Tell is the whole issue of her marshaling services. And here's where I think if you can help me, you can probably help a lot of people out there, because I, for the life of me, do not understand what the government wants to accomplish with this $20 million they're spending in what I assume is some kind of advanced police force that's going to work in conjunction with the RCMP and municipal police to provide something extra. I don't know what the minister is trying to tell me what that extra is. Did you get a better sense of it than I did in today's scrum, Mickey? Because that's where I struggle.
It seems like it's still at its the preliminary stages. She mentioned Minister of Policing Christine Tell mentioned that they want 70 officers under this new marshal service by 2026. She said that they're collaborating with stakeholders on this, and she says that it's essentially going to assist the RCMP. Today at SARM, though, in Saskatoon, RCMP Assistant Commissioner Rhonda Blackmore did express some concerns about this marshal service, and she said that one question that they do have is the focus on funding the RCMP, and why are they putting money into this marshal service when it could be put into the RCMP, who are already established. They have buildings and vehicles and equipment and training for members, so they want to look for some answers on that respect. And Minister Tell did assure us reporters today that they will continue to fund RCMP and that this is just a way to assist them. They're not going to be essentially frontline police officers, but they're there to help with maybe warrants. She did bring up James Smith Cree Nation and said that's a perfect example. And I should mention, when I was up in James Smith Cree Nation, they did bring in police forces from all over. I did see conservation officers there assisting. So I think what their idea is just to kind of augment and help the RCMP with their needs.
It certainly seems to be a work in progress in terms of their vision. And I get that governments go into sessions with their own agenda, and maybe that agenda is longer term and doesn't address the immediacy. But I'm wondering, Jeremy, if the government is losing ground this particular session because the NDP are in a way focused more on immediate issues. I find it fascinating under the circumstances that we had a health uh, expert in a doctor leading the opposition last session, and we seem to be getting a lot more health questions. Seems that under Carla Beck's leadership, we're getting a lot more of the consumer basic meat and potato issues of things immediately affecting the lives of people. And obviously, a lot of that is inflationary costs related to food, to other things, how it affects farmers and particularly ranchers who aren't benefiting. If you're a beef farmer or rancher, benefiting from a significant rise in beef prices lately. I'm a little surprised at the government's reaction to it, maybe not necessarily to what they proposed, they being the NDP, in terms of a a separate look or inquiry into things. But just tell us that story. Tell and if you could do so under where the NDP and the government seem to be taking a different tact, I think it would be helpful.
Sure. I'll go back kind of to what you said about health and how under Ryan Miley it was lots of COVID, right, was being asked and the issues that we saw there. I asked health critic Vicky Mowat this week, being like, well, what do you think about mandates? What is the party's stance on mandates? And she said, we have no opinion. This shouldn't be politicized. That's a
Yeah,
change,
that
right? Like
is a
that's
change,
a
isn't it?
change from what we saw under Ryan Miley and the NDP. The health issues the NDP are bringing up now have more to do with hospitals being at capacity or almost over capacity, hallway medicine, Tylenol shortages, and the affordability stuff that yes, everyone is facing today. So this week, going into that affordability issue, Carla Beck, the leader of the NDP, and Trent Witherspoon, who is the affordability critic, they brought forward a proposal for the government to strike a bipartisan committee in the legislature to investigate high food prices, potential price gouging by corporations, and just to, I guess, shine a light on that and maybe address that if they do find some issues. Now, you're right. With cattle producers, how the supply chain works is they are at the very beginning, or they're at the very beginning. So they don't really set the price, right? Like they have to sell their cattle at the market price, and then Cargill or whoever can buy that, and they can sell it at whatever price they get. So they usually get the least amount of dollars at the end of the day. So that's why they are raising this specifically, and we've seen the agriculture industry ask for this specifically. So the NDP under Carla Beck, they brought this up and the government said, no, we don't need to do this. I asked Finance Minister Donna Harpower about it, and she said the rationale was that the federal government is already addressing this, and we are working with our ranching partners and the federal government on this issue, and so that's why we don't need to do it here in Saskatchewan. We had Alina Young come out today afterwards saying, well, we are legislators here. We can do these things. So why don't we just do it anyway? And so that's where they are standing it on now. This comes as they raise concerns about the government not axing the gas tax that we pay when we fill up our tanks. Still going forward with the SaskPower rate hike. We're going to see what Sask Energy wants to do, but they've asked for a rate hike, but we don't know if the rate review panel will approve that or not. And at the end of the day, the NDP is saying we could do a lot more. We have this big windfall. Why don't we put the money there so that people don't have to, it doesn't have to come out of people's pockets. Donna Harpower is saying we're giving people $500. It's great. We also are paying down the debt. That's also another way we're saving people money.
So, what do you think is going to be mentioned more this session, Mickey? The $500 check, or Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau? Because that seems to be the two
Mm-hmm.
responses to from the government from everything. They're still really hammering hard on the carbon tax issues. Is such. Do you think that that's working? And do you think are people talking about that $500 check and what it means to us, or is it already an afterthought even before most of us get it?
No, I think everyone's talking about it. I was on TikTok the other day and someone did this parody of their Mo money came in the mail and they open the envelope and it's a $500 Monopoly money. Um, yeah, it's pretty funny, but people want these
Yeah.
checks. People want the checks, and the holidays are coming up too, so I know that's going to be useful to people. Jeremy mentioned, bills are going up everywhere, so it would be interesting, at least from my perspective, to see how people are going to use it. Are they going to use it to actually pay down their own personal debt that maybe they accrued over the last few months or over the year? Or are they going to go and use it on something fun? Maybe celebrate at the Grey Cup. Who knows?
But it is great for all of us. But on a more serious note, we had a situation where a house blew up, and you did the story like most of us did, Mickey, in terms of a house blowing up in north central Regina on I think 6th Avenue and Retallick. It's a government Saskatchewan Housing Corporation unit, a fourplex, as a matter of fact. So a pretty new looking unit, by the way. It didn't look like it was in bad shape. What fascinates me, Mickey, is that we have these vacant uh, HC houses out there, and we have this huge problem with rent. We have this huge problem with homelessness in this province, and yet we're still out there spending money on on giving people $500 checks that may or may not need it, while people that kind of really do need some kind of support. And I get why governments do this, because that doesn't really necessarily buy the best votes, uh, or the most votes. But when you have all these problems out there, doesn't that eventually come back to bite the government a bit? And is the opposition making any decent headway on that particular notion in the legislature?
I know the social services minute our critic, Mira Conway, has raised several issues as it relates to housing. One homeowner, apparently has rats in government housing that they're trying to get rid of. And then, as you mentioned, now this rental property, this fourplex blew up, which I live in the south end of the city and we
I
heard
heard it
it.
too. Yeah.
So that was really shocking. Thank goodness nobody died. It's a miracle, really. But yeah, I definitely think that we will probably see more housing issues. This is something too that the last sitting really focused on as well. And what is the Ministry of Social Services going to do about it? And it's a huge file. It's one of the biggest, ministry files that the government has. So I think that there is going to be more pressures coming from the opposition on this.
Yeah, I absolutely think it is. Getting back to the checks for a second, Jeremy, you did a pretty interesting story about who's getting these checks that may be a little bit of a surprise. And I guess it'd be kind of surprising for some people to know that dead people are getting their checks.
Yeah.
How did that happen? How did you run across this story, by the way?
Yeah, it was a little surprising. So we at the paper, so we got a tip from someone just saying, I know of a friend or so and so I have is his grandmother who's passed away got one of these checks, and because her estate is closed, they can't cash it. Anyways, we reached out, we got a hold of who this person was. We also got some calls or some emails in from some other folks about it. So we reached out to a couple, or I reached out to a couple of people who confirmed their stories with me and just saying, yes, my grandma who died 18 months ago, but we had to file her taxes in 2022 as a dead person. Because she still would have been on the list, technically, the government would have sent out a check to her, and they would send out to anyone who would have filed in on that list, even as a deceased person. That's how I understand it. They also could have got, if they filed when they were alive, but then later passed away, they
Passed
can
away, yeah.
also receive one as well.
Which is going to happen, obviously, yeah.
It's
In a
going to
rare case.
happen,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of people have pointed out that, this thing has happened in the past, right? And I spoke with Minister Donna Harpower just about this and what is she hearing? And she said, yes, we have been getting calls about it. And in her mind, it was like the government, it's not like they can do much. And if they did, it would delay the rollout of these checks because you would have to cross reference everyone's name to maybe a death certificate or something. But then when you're also doing that, are you kind of infringing on someone's privacy? So that's why they also didn't do it, because they didn't want to break any privacy rules. So we don't know how many of these checks went out to deceased people, but what we do know is that the one man I spoke with his grandma who got the check, the estate closed. He said he was told to cash it. He can't cash it because the estate is closed, right? It still needs to be open to cash it. So he felt there's a bit of a lack of compassion there from the government financial officials he was speaking with about the check, just because it just kind of sounded like, well, yeah, like you got your check, you should just be happy and do something with it. He's like,
Yeah.
well, my grandma died. Like,
Yeah.
you guys be a little bit more respectful. So yeah, I think that's where the story is probably going to end, but it was just an interesting thing that came up about the checks.
Speaking of stories on this that may or may not end, I'm kind of curious. The opposition made a significant statement last week, and we talked about, I believe, that of the whole notion of children getting some kind of payment.
Mm-hmm.
Is Mickey? Did you hear any movement this week in terms of the government reframing that or looking at it in um, a way where they're going to help families at least in some form, or by now it kind of looks like the government's married into this money rollout to basically adults that file their income tax above 18 years and whatnot, and that's about the end of it. I don't. Is that the way it's going to fall out? Do you think?
I think so. And just to what Jeremy's story, I did hear some frustrations from people
What
because
did you?
they recently moved to the province. Yeah. And they are not getting checks because they recently moved here, but obviously are still facing the same financial pressures of everyone else across Canada in this province. And then so Jeremy's story comes out and they're like, what? Dead people are getting checks? Yeah, I'm not. So I think obviously, there's some people who are going to be unhappy, but Finance Minister Donna Harpower, that she's going to be, presenting another quarterly financial update shortly, and she said that sure, if we're seeing more windfalls, there's a possibility there could be more checks, but she said all that money has really been budgeted for the year. Obviously, they balanced their budget, they're paying off debt, they did these $500 checks, so unless they're making a shockingly more amount of money, I don't think we'll be seeing more
Yeah,
checks at this time.
yeah. I can't see how they can afford to do any more. And that update that may or may not come before the session's over. I'm curious to see. I guess if it's really good news, it might come before the session's over. I'm curious to see how much money there is at basically the mid-year point of the year. One other story I'd like to talk about before we go, uh, Jeremy, is the story that you did yesterday. And I don't know if Mickey wound up doing as much on it or not, but it's in relation to Emmanuel Villa that I believe is located out in Emerald Park,
Yeah.
and the concerns that they have that other companies are getting favoritism and allegations of pretty serious nature that they're making. Why that favoritism might have occurred. Can you tell us what Emmanuel Villa is, what the issue is, and what is this has been all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take you all back to 2020.
Okay.
This is where we need to start. So in 2020, in Regina, we have what's called Pioneer Village. It's a big long-term care home, and it has mold problems. It's actually in quite a bad shape. So the government had to put out an RFP, which is like a request for to procure some long-term care beds. So they procured about 100. So they were looking to move 100 people from Pioneer Village to other care homes. One of the homes was Emmanuel Villa. They got awarded 40. The other home that got awarded was Bright View, and they got 60. So this was all fine and dandy for 2 years until this year, the government or the Saskatchewan Health Authority decided we are not going to continue with Emmanuel Villa because the contract is coming up by the end of December. So meanwhile, a lot of these patients from Emmanuel Villa are being transferred to Brightview. And the people at Emmanuel Villa raised concerns they believe about Brightview. They called it a smelly situation, or a stinky situation,
Yeah.
sorry, because Brightview, Minister Christine Tell, so her late brother who has passed away, he had an interest in Brightview. We found this out through the commissioner just yesterday. And so people at Emmanuel
Conflict of
Villa,
interest commissioner when
yes,
I believe it was the NDP had asked for
yes.
a letter, but the government released the letter, which is kind of
Yes.
interesting.
So
So
it's my understand. So the conflict of interest commissioner, they sent the letter to Matt Love, who's the seniors critic for the NDP. So I'm assuming he asked them to look into
to look
this
into it and see if there was a conflict there.
if there was a
Yeah.
conflict. What the conflict of interest commissioner found was that Tell herself, has no conflict of interest in this Brightview. She did acknowledge that her late brother did have an interest in it, and the commissioner was actually said that was a good thing that she said that it was encouraging, or that that type of thing should be encouraged. And so that's where the story was. And I mean, Emmanuel Villa is still really upset. They still think there's something wrong here. Um, Going forward, the government has another RFP out for 375 beds because this is to replace Village beds, and Emmanuel Villa says their RFP was rejected for that, and they are claiming that Brightview could get this RFP. We spoke with Everett Hindley, the seniors minister, about this. He's like, I don't see the RFPs. I don't know who's applied. And the fact that Tell's late brother had an interest in Brightview, it shouldn't be a concern. So Minister Tell comes out today to speak about RCMP, and then I asked about this. It was a bit of a tense exchange. I think we were all there, but she just reaffirmed that she the commissioner found no conflict of interest with her, and that these allegations that are being made, I guess, there's no basis to them, is what she said. So that is the Brightview Emmanuel Villa story.
Yeah, another day in paradise in terms of attention
Yeah.
at the legislature. I am afraid, folks, that's about all the time we have today. I see where the clock is telling me to wrap it up. So I very much thank Jeremy, and thank you again for joining us, Mickey, as usual. And thanks for all your good work this week. Have a good time at the Grey Cup.
Yeah. You're going.
I am going. Yes, I am going because apparently it's an old person's thing, and that's perfect for me. So
We'll have fun.
yeah. Okay, see you guys there. And thanks again very much. Welcome. Well, and hopefully we'll see you sometime soon on Inside the Marble Palace. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.